It is on April Fool's Day, and I promise I'm not going to play any jokes on you. This is not a joking time by any means. This is a very serious time, and we're actually here to talk about a very serious type of strategy tonight, which is distribution strategies. And I just want to just make sure that we've got good audio and video. I know that we've had some real internet problems today. So Amanda, if everything is coming through, can you give me a hand raise there? And all right, good. Okay, so let's get started tonight. We're going to talk about distribution strategies. Before I get started, I want to tell you that if you stay online with me here at the end of tonight's live stream or webinar, we're actually going to give you a free offer, something that we came up with, which has a lot to do with what the first question was. And so you'll see that at the end. And we'll also make sure, one other housekeeping note before I get started. I've been getting a lot of emails about what the broadcast schedule is. And I want to show you real quick that when we're on a broadcast schedule, by simply going to our website, and let me make that a little bit bigger so it's a little bit easier to see. If you just go up here to hhrdm.com, again, it's hhrdm.com, and you go to the blog page, and on the blog page, you go to events, my mistake, you go to events, and there will be a broadcast schedule. Now, if you look, we're on the last leg of that broadcast tonight on distribution strategies. And again, you can catch the webinars at night, and then you can also catch the live streams through either Facebook or on YouTube the next morning. Also, you can catch the live broadcasts right here by just going into that actual pull down here. So you go to events. If you just click on events, you'll get the broadcast schedule. If you click on live broadcast and you want to join us through here in the morning, you'll see when I get on live in the morning, that stream is live. You can watch it directly through our web page. All right, so before we get started, I want to make one little announcement. Thank you for all of you that have participated, and we got a lot of emails and requests that went out to Julie's mom, Joyce, to make some of the medical masks, and she is still awaiting some of the materials, and that should be in soon. And as soon as she does, she'll get those out as quick as she can. All right, well, let's get started with tonight. And it was interesting to start off tonight's discussion. It's interesting that in the last probably 20-some years, every time that I would hire a new financial planner and start training them, they would always come to me with an aha moment. And they would say, you know, this is very different than anything that the financial industry has told me what to do or has taught me what to do. We've gotten a very mixed message from the financial industry, whether they work for a bank, a brokerage company, or a financial institution. I don't know, maybe it's just my extreme sense of skepticism and, you know, doing this so long, I feel like I've seen behind the curtain, and there really is not a Wizard of Oz. There's just a little guy back there pulling the levers. And this is what I believe a lot of the financial institution is. So when we talk about this tonight, distribution strategies, I really want to kind of focus in on first, what you can and you cannot control. And then second, why is the American public being fed so much garbage information from the financial institutions? And I'm going to show you exactly why. And I think you might have this aha moment too. And much of the information is fed through because anytime, and you've heard me say this before, anytime that you're in a grocery store and you walk down the checkout aisle, now you've got to be 6 feet apart from somebody else, so you might not see those magazines. However, you'll generally see Money Magazine and Forbes Magazine, and I don't know who else is on those shelves, but you'll always see on the front page, they talk about saving money to retirement, saving money to 401ks, and that is a general type of advertisement. It doesn't necessarily mean that that is what's good for you. So let's talk about what we can control and what we cannot control. So we can't control getting in an accident. Now you want to drive like a crazy person, you're going to increase your odds. You can't control a healthcare catastrophe. However, I would probably tell you that if you are outside today and you're walking 1 foot from somebody else and they're coughing and sneezing and you're not doing anything about it and you're not protecting yourself, you're probably not reducing your chances or you're increasing your chances for a healthcare catastrophe. Stock market volatility. While you can't control the stock market, you can control what you invest in. Same thing with interest rates. You cannot control the interest rates. However, you can play the banking game. So the bankers, they play the interest rate game. They know how to lend out at 5 or 6 or 7%, and then they pay you 0.5% to 1.5%. If you understand how to play that game, you can still play the bankers' games. Inflation, that is not one thing that you can control. And being sued. Now, again, if you want to go, in some parking lot and punch somebody out, I'm sure you're going to get sued. But typically, you can't control a lot of that. If you accidentally stop in the middle of the highway, or what I'm going to foresee happening, in all of these world events, we see things that happen. We see domestic violence increase. We see alcoholism increase. We see drug usage increase. We see exterior violence increase. And then we also see lawsuits increase. So knowing that, the question is, what are you doing about it right now? Because you can't control what's going on in the world, but you can't control how and what kind of fortress you're setting up for yourself. What you can't control, well, you can control how much you spend, and you can control where and how you invest. Believe it or not, you can actually control how much in tax you pay based upon the structure that you had. Now, Judge Leonard Hand was a very famous judge who basically said you have the ability and right as an American citizen to pay the minimum amount, and you have the right to use every law that you can to pay the minimum amount of tax by law. I'm not suggesting by any means that you don't pay the amount of tax that you owe. I'm suggesting little as possible. You can control how you own your assets, which could control how you get sued, or if somebody can get to you during lawsuit or health catastrophe, et cetera. How you protect your assets. And tonight, we're going to talk about from where you distribute income from. That's a big one. So we're going to talk about the distribution in income. Now, let's start with the accumulation stage versus the distribution stage. See, what most people don't understand is that while you're working and you're earning money, you are people at work. However, when you jump over that great divide and you convert from people at work to money at work, things get a lot more complex. And what I mean by that is it's actually quite easy in the accumulation phase. It doesn't take a lot of, there's just not a lot of complexity. What do I mean by that? I'm going to show you real quick in a few minutes. When you're saving money and investing while you're working, where do you invest it to? What kind of accounts first? And as long as you have a good asset allocation and you continually put away, it doesn't take a genius to figure out how to accumulate a lot of assets in this good country of ours. I mean, it's amazing, amazing that I've coined a term that says this is the greatest country in the world because anybody here can accumulate assets, but they can also lose it just as quickly if they do not plan correctly. So again, it's not hard. Why? If you are working and you're earning money and you're saving, and I don't care where you're saving, if you're saving into 401ks, if you're saving into IRAs, Roths, non-qualified accounts, as long as you are just putting away on a regular basis and not trying to time the market, and if you're putting away every paycheck, every quarter, you're buying some low, some high, also called dollar cost averaging. It doesn't take a genius to figure it out. Now, you'll read these 1 in a million cases. Well, I bought Google when it was $1. Okay. The statistical chance of you actually buying the next Google, the next whatever it is, Amazon, you actually have a better chance. Statistically, you have a better chance at the blackjack table than you do by finding the next Google or Amazon or Netflix. Why? For every 3,000 companies that come to market, you get one Google, you get one Amazon. The rest are mostly failures. So again, it's not hard while you're working to accumulate money as long as you just have a good asset allocation program and you save on a regular basis and you don't try to time the market. Now, where the confusion, complexity, and majority of mistakes happen is when you convert from people at work to money at work. Because now, as you're going to see today, there are a lot of complexities in making sure you don't mess up your distributions. And I'm also going to show you why the majority of people, they just make mistakes along the way. And why? Well, the typical American, what they do is they use what's called income scraping. Now, what is income scraping? Well, income scraping is where, let's say a person, and I've seen this, they'll come to me and they'll say, I've been retired for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. And I'll say, how are you getting your income? Well, I'm taking my dividends. Okay, you're taking your dividends. And so you'll see they'll have Social Security, maybe a little bit of a pension plan, and then the difference is made up in dividends. And I'll say, well, how do you know how much you can spend on an annual basis? Well, I'm making 8% dividends. I'll say, well, what happens if the dividends go down? And typically in the last 10 years, what I'll hear is, oh, no, I've got this great dividend program. It's got a good history of dividends and it will never go down. Well, we're going to see dividends cut in half here in the next year or so. Now, will they return? Yeah, I believe they return. But a person that sets up their distribution strategy based upon income scraping. And what is income scraping? That is where you take all the accounts and you say, all right, I've got a money market paying 1.5% maybe. And I've got this CD over here that they're going to send me the interest on. And over here, I've got this bond, it's paying interest. And what they do is they take all these numbers together, all these dividends and interest, and they'll say, send me all that money. They're scraping it off of the top is what they're doing. So that's income scraping. Now, why does that not make sense? So let's take a look. Let's say, as an example, I've got $100,000 sitting in a bank account. And let's say they're graciously giving me 1 to 1.5%, which you know now what's going to happen, right? Those bank accounts are probably going to go down to lower than they were in 2008. It's going to be a nightmare for people holding on to a bunch of cash. Now, some people say, well, Warren Buffett's holding on to $125 billion in cash. Well, he is, because he's ready to make a play. He's ready to make a value play. He's going to buy stock at 30, 40, 50% discount. That's different than the average retiree that's sitting there holding $100,000, $300,000, $500,000 in cash. And they're sitting there going, yeah, but that's my emergency fund, which I probably should talk about that in a second. But they're saying that's my emergency fund. Great, that's your emergency fund. And it's paying you 1%. And then what I'll do is I'll say, well, where are you getting your income from? I'm taking the dividends from my stock. Okay, now let's think about this for a second. The stock is making 7 or 8% dividend, or even if it's a blue chip stock like a Verizon or whatever it might be 4 or 5% in dividends. So think about how you are destroying the future value. You're taking a dividend out to spend while you're holding cash earning nothing. Well, some people say, well, then where would I get my income from? You drain down the cash. You spend down what the least productive account is. Well, what do I do with the dividends? You reinvest it, because if you reinvest it, you're building compound interest on that 8% or 5% or whatever your dividend is. So again, income scraping is not a good way to distribute income. Another method is they take income from the wrong place. I'll see people take money from an IRA in the form of a required minimum distribution. And what they're doing is they're selling stock to provide their income while they're sitting there holding savings bonds, while they're sitting there holding annuities, while they're sitting there holding CDs. They're selling stock in an IRA to distribute to themselves while they're sitting there holding, again, that unproductive property. Does not fill bracket holes. So I've seen people where, here's a good example. Married, filing jointly, you have a $77,000 capital gains tax-free limit, meaning you could sell stock, and even if you want to keep the stock, you can rebuy it, which we discussed under tax strategies under the webinar. You can rebuy it and up the cost basis, but you're not filling up to that bracket hole. Remember, we talked about this before. You got this bracket. And in the United States, unlike many countries like Germany, which have total progressive, meaning that they tax you. So in Germany, or many European countries, if you make $250,000, there's a tax rate on the full $250,000. In the United States, they tax you a certain rate on the first segment. So maybe 0 to, I don't know, $50,000. You have one tax rate. And then the 50,000 that goes above that, there's another rate. Well, let's say that your income is right here. You have this limit before you get to the next bracket. So a lot of times what people will do is they will take out just this amount right here, and they won't fill up the rest of the bracket. And then what happens is they take a big distribution, and then what happens is they jump up to the higher bracket. So the goal is fill up that bracket on an annual basis. And again, this is something that I see a lot of people online here, and I see some clients, but I see a whole bunch of names I don't know. And so if your financial planner is not figuring out those bracket holes for you each year, you are losing returns. We're going to talk about that a little while, called Gamma. Those are the 5 different angles on how to get extra returns by filling up bracket holes and doing certain techniques and increasing your distribution. So not filling bracket holes. Again, we covered looking at RMDs as income. Just because you have a required minimum distribution does not mean that you have to cash in the account and take the money, which, it's amazing, this media. I have read in very credible financial magazines. I've seen it on TV. I've even seen congressmen come out and say, well, the reason that we put a delay on the 2020 RMDs is so that people wouldn't have to cash in their stock and take a loss. Well, listen, if you don't need the money from the RMD, right, and you can afford to delay it, you can afford to take the money out and not pay the tax. But see, this is a great tactic by Congress. Think about it this way. If they delay it, there's going to be more in there. But if you had a stock in there worth $100,000 originally before this crash, and now it's worth $75,000, why wouldn't you take that money out? You don't have to sell the stock. You can take out the shares. You can move the shares without having to cash out the stock. So again, another distribution mistake. And then the last part is you don't calculate the 9 methods of distributions and compare before taking income. I'm going to show you a tool that we use here in a second. And let me see if I can find it real quick. Bear with me 1 second, please. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to see if I can find this distribution system. Okay, we're going to jump into eMoney here in just a minute. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by figuring out mathematically what is the actual best system to use for distribution calculations. Okay, so let's jump back into distribution mistakes. And with proper planning and calculations, we model out cash flows with taxes and variations. Takes from most tax efficient source first, distributes and pays taxes at lower rates even when they don't need it. Again, this is taking out the concept of, what if I do a Roth conversion now? I pay the tax because the tax now is going to be 20, 30, 40, 50% discounted from what it might be next year. What if I don't need my money from the RMD, but I can take out shares right now while we're still in a low bracket and the stock is depressed, okay? And actually, you don't if you're not 72 years old, you don't have to take an RMD, but you can still manage this variable or this concept by doing a Roth conversion. You could take the money out of the IRA and immediately convert it to a Roth. So if you have that $100,000 stock and it's worth $75,000 now, you can convert that 75 out of the IRA into the Roth, and you can just move the shares. You don't even have to sell the shares. That's the beauty of it. Does not allow long-term money to sit in the lowest return investments. Look, we have people now that are sitting on annuities paying 1 to 2%. We have people sitting on CDs that are, paying 1% to 1.5%. We have people out there that are sitting on money markets. It looks like I'm back on. It looks like we had a little bit of an interruption there. Let me just see if I can reconnect. Amanda, can I get a hand raise if you can still hear me? Okay, fantastic. Hopefully you have me back on. I can't complain. I've been watching, Fox Business, and during the entire thing, they have these guests on, Skype and Zoom, and they keep getting disconnected. So, even a multi-billion-dollar network is still having connectivity and internet issues. So we're doing pretty good. I only get a couple disconnects. So let's go back to where we left off here. And does not allow long-term money to sit in the lowest return investments. Again, This is really referring to people that are sitting on large amounts of cash. Now, some people will come back and say a large number of cash waiting to buy is different than letting it sit there because there's fear and you want an emergency fund. So a lot of times people will come to me and they'll say, well, how much should I have an emergency fund? Well, these rule of thumbs, I do not like rule of thumbs. Here, let me give you an example of this. Now, most of you know I've been doing this 35 plus years. The College for Financial Planning has been around about as long as I have in this industry. And while we do follow all of the generally accepted financial planning principles that the College for Financial Planning teaches, there are some rules of thumb that I do not apply. Why? Well, one of those is linear planning. We've talked about that in the past where the School for Financial or the College for Financial Planning likes to go out to age 100 and assume that you're going to be spending the same amount all the way out to age 100. We like using bell curves because actual experience, people in their 80s are not spending the same amount of money that people in their 60s and 70s spend. Health and mobility issues. Another rule of thumb that's always take your age and multiply that by 20%, and that's the amount you should have in bonds. Well, that makes no logical sense at all. If I have a client that comes in that's got a federal pension or something that is a guaranteed type pension, and 100% of all of their income is covered through that pension, other than being able to sleep at night, now that's another part of the discussion on asset allocation, why would that person want to have 80% in bonds? Okay, so that rule of that 80-20, if you're 100, if you have you should have 100% in bonds. I don't understand that. That's a bad rule of thumb. And the other rule of thumb is that I don't like is have 6 months of your monthly income sitting inside of a cash account. Well, let's look at it this way. Let's say a person comes to us and they're making, let's say we have a physician and they're making $1 million a year. Do you think I'm going to tell that physician to have $500,000 sitting in cash? Heck no. Here's how you determine how much money you should have in cash. What do you need the cash for? What is your exposure? Now, there's two parts to this. The first part is, what do you need in risk management? Because that's why most people hold so much in cash. They think I'm going to need it for some kind of emergency. And then the other part of it is, what do I want to invest? Now, if you go to cash and you're waiting to just hit the mark, like Warren Buffett is doing, that's different. Now, what I find is that most people that sit there and say, well, I'm in cash because I am waiting for the market to turn. And then the market turns like it is now. And then you go back to them and say, are you ready to do it? No, I'm a little afraid of this market right now. And they don't ever move. They just keep sitting on the cash, diminishing the value because inflation is going up at a higher rate than what they're actually earning. Now, let's go back to the first person, because in 3.5 decades, I have rarely met anybody that holds on to a large sum of cash and then invests it when the market dumps. What they always do is they wait until the market returns and everybody's fear of missing out. And then they buy and it goes down, and then they beat themselves up and they sell it out for a loss. They go back to cash and they just rinse and repeat and do the whole thing over again and keep losing money. Now, the other person is the person that actually wants to hold an amount of cash. And that whole 6-month rule, I think, is absolute garbage. It makes no sense. There's no mathematical calculation. You can't apply a rule of thumb to every single person. Why? Well, let's say I retire and I have a federal pension. Let's say the federal pension is paying me $100,000 a year. And let's say further that I have $80,000 a year in annual expenses. Well, okay, so what are my risks? So the risks are primarily healthcare, house, car, and family. So let's run through each one of them. If I'm 65 years old, I have Medicare. So if I have a Medicare supplement, I'm going to have about 99% of everything covered, other than maybe some exploratory surgeries or, cancer after 75 years old, 77 years old. There's certain things that Medicare is not so good at covering. So that might have a qualification for having some cash, right? But not the 6-month of income rule. What else? Well, I might have a house and the roof, might blow off. Let's look at every possible scenario in a house that isn't covered by insurance. Well, I have an old roof. Well, what's a roof cost? $20,000, $30,000. I have an air conditioner that goes out, $10,000 to $20,000, right? Now, I might have a home warranty. Some of those things may or may not be covered. However, if there is a risk where something falls apart in the house, well, then I've got insurance. So then I have to look at what is my deductible. If my deductible is, if you follow some of my other rules and some of my other webinars, I said, if you have the financial means, increase your deductible to decrease the actual expense. So if I increase the deductible to say $2,500 from now to $250, I might save some money. So if my maximum risk is $2,500, how much do I need in a cash account? $2,500. If I have an automobile, what is my maximum risk on the automobile? Well, if I have it properly insured with an umbrella, and let's say, as an example, my deductible is now $2,500 because Ken Nimblor told you to get a $2,500 deductible so that you could save on the auto insurance. What's my maximum risk? $2,500. So let's say the worst thing happened. My roof blows off, my air conditioner goes out, and my car, right? And let's say the car is $2,500 and I've got to have $20,000 or $30,000 for the home repair that's not covered by insurance. What's my maximum out-of-pocket risk? 30 grand? So if I'm a doctor making $1 million a year, can you see how ridiculous that 6-month rule is? I'm not going to have $500,000 sitting in an account. I want to have probably $25,000 to $30,000. I want to keep my money working for me. When I see cash, all I can think about is a lazy worker that's sitting on the job. You know, it's funny, when I was living in Florida, we had this pool put on the back of the house there. And it was interesting because the foreman came over and he said, now what I want you to do is, he says, you see these 3 guys I got working for me? He says, they're very lazy. And he said, I have a lot of jobs to cover. And he said, I want you to give me a call if you find that they're just sitting there. The first day, here it is. The morning, these 3 guys show up. One guy's sitting on a lawn chair smoking. Another guy's sitting eating a sandwich at like 8 o'clock in the morning. And the other guy's laying sunning himself. So I call up the foreman. I said, all 3 of your guys are sitting around there doing nothing at all. So he drives out there, he, reams them out, and all of a sudden they get back to work until he leaves. About an hour later, they're doing the same thing. You know what? That's no different than letting cash sit in an account. It's like a lazy person not working. You got to get it working. And otherwise, it is going to go backwards. It will, like the lazy worker, it's going to cost you money. So annuities, CDs, money markets, these are the kinds of things that may or may not be helping you and that you can actually accelerate. Also, people that understand break-even analysis. You heard me talk before that I cashed in my annuities in 2017 when they reduced the caps down to 2.5%. And one of the reasons is I looked at it and I had to pay a penalty. But when I computed the amount of the penalty that I had to pay versus the period of time that it would take me to break even with the penalty and what my opportunity was in other investments, I cashed them out. I paid a lot in penalties, right? But I've also done much, much, much better than letting them sit in there into, the lazy man's investment. So you got to understand that break even. And sometimes it's better to pay a penalty or even pay the tax. And paying the tax goes back to that whole Roth conversion, right? I've heard people say this over and over again. Ken, it sounds great. I know you've mathematically proven it to me, but I just can't bring myself to paying the tax. That would be like saying, okay, I have a food bill. Let me use this. I have a utility bill, and the utility bill is due on the 30th of the month. However, the utility company says if I pay it on the 15th of the month, I can pay $700 versus $1,000. You got to pay the utility bill. It's not a question of if you have to or not. So the question is, when can you pay it to get the largest amount of the discount? And again, you got to just overcome this objection, I guess it is, or this mental hurdle of saying, I don't want to pay the tax. It is, when can I pay the tax at the lowest possible rate? So let's get into one of the things that really, really is the way that the financial institutions are structured. Now, if I have, let's say, in money sitting inside of a mutual fund, and you've probably seen this over your lifetime. You go into the bank, you go into the brokerage company, and you talk to the investment people there, and they'll say, we've had these kind of rates of returns, and we've had an average 8% rate of return over this period of time. And people buy investments, and they buy them like they buy dinner, right? They buy them from right to left. And it's, do you know what I mean by that? In other words, you have a menu, you go to a nice restaurant, you open up the menu, and if you're anything like me, you look at the right side of the menu, right? You look at $39, $39, $39, $39, oh, $9.99. That's my deal. And then you look left, and it's like liver and onions. So then you make the mental comparison, liver and onions versus steak, but it cost me $20 more. Now when it comes to a menu, if you're like me, I'll probably eat the liver and onions because I don't want to spend the $20. I don't see the extra value in that, but that's just me. I'm not a real foodie. However, when it comes to investments, people make that mistake. They will buy investments from right to left. What they do is they look at, this is the average performance over 10 years. They don't look at fees. They don't look at taxes. They don't look at risks. They'll just look at what they're proposed, and they buy that investment. They usually don't have any idea what they're buying. There's no asset allocation. And the people that sit in these banks and these brokerage accounts, they just kind of propose things based upon these prospectuses. That's how people buy things. And unfortunately, these people that are sitting inside of the banks or the brokerage companies, or now it's the big push where they're calling themselves financial advisors, right? I love this. I've been doing this so long, I've seen this entire change. And I laugh about it with colleagues. I'll say, you know what? People in the financial industry and the insurance industry, they're like roaches. Roaches have survived through every world calamity, right? Through the ice age, through everything. They're just survivors. And if we look back, this is exactly what insurance agents and stockbrokers have done. Why? They don't call them stockbrokers anymore, right? They're financial advisors. And, when the stock trades, when TD Ameritrade came out in the 90s and came out with internet trading at $9.99 and stockbrokers couldn't charge 1 to 3% in every trade, what did they do? They all now switched to mutual funds and variable annuities, right? That's what they sell. But the concept of the way these financial institutions are set up is they do not want you to distribute money. They do not teach distribution strategies to their advisors. Now, how do I know that? Because I've hired a lot of financial planners over the years. And if I hire them from a financial institution, I have to retrain them. I have to reteach them to forget everything that the financial institutions have taught you. This is not about keeping assets. This is not about just accumulating assets. This is about distributing assets or distributing income in the most tax efficient, maximum way possible. Now, why is that in opposition to financial institutions? Well, financial institutions are valued based upon how much they keep in their coffers. So if they don't teach you how to distribute money, then they have more. If they say, hey, when the market is down, you don't ever want to take money out, or they'll say you want to put as much money as you can into IRAs and 401ks, those are sure signs that they're more concerned about holding on to their assets than they are about figuring out how to give the client a better, more enjoyable, and maximum life income. Going back, I think this generation is very different than when I first started. When I first started, I was dealing with a lot of World War II veterans. And the World War II veterans in that era had a very different mentality. That mentality back then was, Ken, I don't really want to live at a high lifestyle. And here's why. If they came out of that era, either they had lived through the Depression or their parents had lived through the Depression. There was a different culture, a different mentality. And so their goal was to leave as much as they could to their children. This, and I saw this paradigm shift about 10 to 15 years ago. Now what it is Ken, listen, and if I spend the last dollar and the last check that I write to the funeral home bounces, I'm happy. My kids can fend for themselves. I put them through college. I did all these things for them. So I want to live to the maximum income that I can. And unfortunately, these financial institutions, they're not teaching this. Why? Well, the more you distribute, the less that they earn. So let's talk about the 9 methods of distribution. Now, what I'm going to do is when I get into eMoney here, we're going to actually talk about how that you can model out these different distribution and liquidation, what they call them liquidation strategies, okay? So let's cover these 9, qualified and non-qualified ratio. So most people have some money sitting in retirement plans, whether it be an IRA, a non-IRA, and non-qualified, meaning just an individual account. Hope you don't have an individual account or a joint account. Hopefully you've gotten that into a trust. Hopefully not a single account that you own. Yeah, this is me scolding you, making sure that you do not have anything that will ever go through guardianship or probate. So non-qualified is basically just a non-IRA. It's an account that you will pay taxes on. The second type of liquidation strategy is by liquidity. So what is liquidity? Well, an annuity might only have a 10% liquidity unless you're willing to pay a penalty. Something like a bond or a stock might have day-to-day liquidity, but you run these in methods. So first by liquidity, then by lowest performance, and then by highest risk. By liquidity, highest risk, highest performance. By liquidity, lowest tax impact. By performance, then highest risk, lowest performance, lowest tax impact, then lowest performance, and then highest tax impact, lowest performance, and then finally, specific account distribution. So now is when I really get to show you what a bunch of geeks we are. All of us financial planners are absolute geeks because we love to sit there and model things out, measure them out, and test things out. It's kind of a combination of being an architect and an engineer at the same time. We get to paint a picture, figure out what we want to build, but then we go back and we engineer it. So let me show you how the financial planners in our firm do this. So when you're working with them, this is what they're doing behind the scenes. And you may not even see this, but this is what they're working on. So we might have a current strategy. We might model it out in the bell curve, which I'll explain in a minute. So you have a semi-retirement. This might be when you start toning down. Retirement strategies when you actually convert from people at work to money at work. And then the bell curve is the advanced year strategy. Again, this is where we kind of come over that hump, and our modeling is designed to spend as much as we can without running out of money before you hit that top of the bell curve. That top of the bell curve is a certain age. It's generally 78 to 82. And then we know that certain things will go down. People, how do I know this? Because I've done this for so long. I've been through so many retirements and seeing what happens. And what a lot of financial planning software does is it models so that the expenses go all the way up to 99, 100 years old. It doesn't work like that. Because when you're 85 years old, you're not rebuying cars every 1 to 3 years. You're not driving across the country. You're not taking cruises. My gosh, especially not now. You know, every month to 3 months, you're probably spending a lot of time in doctor's offices. Your mobility might decrease. You might have a loved one that's sick at home that you have to stay at home and take care of. So we model this out so that there's these different time periods so that you can really try to enjoy money to its highest. So depending upon what period you're in, our planners will model this out and choose the event or the type of liquidation strategy. Now, what you're looking at here on screen, this is the back end to eMoney. eMoney is the main tool that we use in-house in order to model out cash flows and in order to make sure that we are optimizing the liquidation strategy. Now, what we can do is we can actually put in an actual user define. And again, going back to here, this is the specified account distribution. So if we have an account, let's say it's an annuity, let's say it's a CD, let's say it's a cash account, we might want to spend that account down first. So we might pick that exact asset, and let's say it might be a taxable brokerage account. So we can actually pick that asset to spend that asset down first into each of the time periods. So I think, again, going back to the question of how are you modeling out your distribution? Are you just taking the scraping? Are you figuring out from a mathematical and calculation standpoint what is actually the best way to model it out? So what is your method for distribution? Let's talk about the flow of distribution. And let me just do a real quick sound check because on my backup monitor here, I do have a freeze. Amanda, can you help me out? Are you hearing audio? And let's see, Juliana, are you seeing clear video? Or is the video frozen? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Well, hopefully that will come back in just a second. As long as you have audio, you'll be able to catch up here. And again, if we do have online issues, which we're obviously having some internet jam problems, this will be live streaming tomorrow morning on either Facebook or on YouTube. Okay, so let's talk about the flow of distribution. When we distribute assets, there's a typical methodology as to how we distribute assets. One of the first things that we're going to look at trying to do is take money from ordinary income accounts first. This might be accounts that have low rate of return and they're highly taxed. Next, we move to non-qualified investments, which are capital gains eligible because capital gains tax is the lowest tax that we can pay. Next, we're going to move to tax deferred accounts. annuities, savings bonds, things that you might be able to use what's called ratio exempt income. What does that mean? If I have $100,000 in an annuity and I have $50,000 in cost basis, if I annuitize that annuity over a 5-year period and I get $10,000 a year, I'm paying taxes on half of it, $5,000. The IRS has what's called ratio exemptions based upon the type of investment. Next, I'm going to move to IRAs and 401ks. Why? Because they are 100% taxed. Unfortunately, all of that is going to be taxable income, and it adds on to your adjusted gross income. So it's pretty tax heavy. And lastly, I'm going to distribute from IRAs and IRA Roths last. Now, that is different than when I'm accumulating assets. Now, when I am accumulating assets, what I'm trying to do is a different methodology. I'm going to fill up my Roth first, then I'm going to move to non-qualified, then fill up the tax-deferred bucket, then the ordinary bucket, and finally the IRA and 401k bucket. However, I will tell you, this is not a rule of thumb. I'm not a favorite of rule of thumbs. Why? Well, if somebody comes to me and they're making $1 million a year and they're living in California, they're probably paying about 60% in tax. So I might put that IRA or 401k ahead of the Roth. Again, it all depends upon the situation. So I don't want you to say, well, Ken said that this is exactly the way you do it. You again have to run those analytics and those calculations to make sure it is working in your best effort based upon your specific tax bracket. So let's go ahead and move on to the buckets. Now, many of you have followed what I teach in the bucket strategies, and you'll see there's the 1 to 5 year bucket. And in that 1 to 5 year bucket, you have cash, money markets, CDs, notes, and short-term bonds. In the 5-year bucket, we have intermediate bonds, FDIC insured notes, CDARS, preferred stocks, and convertibles. Now, these buckets are designed based upon the volatility. So as an example, if I have a CD or money market, it might now be paying me next to nothing. It could be 0.25% or 0.5%, but it has no volatility. And again, if I jump into a preferred stock, I might make 7 or 8%, but I might have volatility. So when I am distributing assets, the last thing that I want to do, if I go back to my saying, do not distribute assets, well, don't use a variable investment to pay fixed expenses. So again, in the 1 to 5 year bucket, you have non-variable investments. In bucket 2, which is the 5 to 10 year bucket, you have investments that do have variations, but they are pretty small variations compared to bucket 3. Bucket 3 is the 10-year bucket. This is long-term bonds, stocks, real estate, and REITs. And again, the goal is what you're going to do is you're going to pay those out over a period of time. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back my timeline just so you can see that when I'm talking about investing in real estate and I'm talking about investing in stocks, I am only talking about using bucket 3. Do not use bucket 1 or 2. And again, because you're going to gauge how much you need for your income based upon what's in each one of those buckets. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say, as an example, I'm going to take $100,000 and I want to figure out the bucket strategy. I'm going to put $30,000 in bucket 1, $20,000 in bucket 2, and $50,000 in bucket 3. Now, if that person has an excess in bucket 1 and they're sitting there holding that excess, they might be able to put that into the market or real estate now. But I'm not advocating in any way that what you do right now is you convert your 1 year or your 1 to 5 year bucket or your 5 to 10 year into stocks. Please, please understand. What I've been talking about for the last 2 weeks online is utilizing bucket 3 only into the stock and the real estate market and utilizing some very creative and different techniques to get more into bucket 3. But do not destroy your guaranteed income and your structured income for the first 10 years. That's why we structure it that way. A lot of planning, a lot of math, a lot of calculations have gone into how much you should have in your 1 to 5 year, 5 to 10 year bucket. and then the excess gets put into the 10-year bucket. So let's go back. What will happen is during those first 5 years, so 1 to 5, money is coming out of that bucket. Now is when we get into this fun discussion about principal. So here's one of the problems that I always encounter. Einstein said something that was very profound. He said that the only thing harder to break than an atom was a belief. And some of our beliefs are handed down to us by the wrong people. A lot of them are handed down to us by parents. And a lot of our parents had no financial success. They do not understand money. My parents are a great example. Super scholars, right? PhDs, master's degrees, but do not understand anything about money whatsoever. So just because somebody is highly educated does not mean that they understand how to manage money in the correct method. And again, managing money is not just buying and selling investments. It's everything that we've talked about the last 2 weeks. Protecting assets, distributing assets, reducing income tax. It's a lot more complex than just knowing what to buy and when to sell it, right? So again, beliefs can sometimes prevent you from making a right move. Let me give that to you in proof. And some of you are going to laugh because I use this a lot. Fill in the blanks. Money doesn't grow on trees. Where'd you get that from? Probably from your parents. Here's another one. Close the door. You don't live in a barn. Where does that come from? Probably your parents. I remember my parents yelling at me, close the window. What do you think? Money grows on trees? Well, air conditioners aren't for free. And so we bring those beliefs into the future. As I said and stated earlier, we are now transitioning from that Depression and that World War II culture. So it's probably a high probability that your parents were in that World War II era. Now, what does that mean? They had a different culture, a different thinking. They wanted to pass everything on to kids. Most people today want to enjoy life. However, some of those beliefs seep into our money decisions and they destroy our financial stability. Let me give you an example of that. So people will come in and I'll say, why are you sitting on so much cash? And they'll say, well, I want to have an emergency fund. Well, we've already broken that rule, right, by what we just talked about. And then I'll say, why are you taking money out of your IRA when you don't need it while you're sitting on cash? Well, I need that cash for an emergency fund. And then I'll hear this one. I'll say to them, listen, what I want you to do before you start spending dividends, before you start taking the interest and spending it from a 4 or 5 or 6% bond, I want you to spend down your cash account. And here's what they'll say, but I'll run out of principal. No, you won't. Think about the math of this. If I take an account, and let's say that account's sitting in a cash account, and now it's going to be earning 0.25% to 0.5%. So we already know it's losing money against inflation. And then I take an account, whether it's a bond making 4 or 5% getting reinvested, or I take a dividend stock, maybe 4% to 7%, a preferred stock. And if I take that dividend from that stock and I take that interest from that bond and I spend that money and I leave the cash account, I am losing money in value over time. So what I'll say is spend that cash account down, and usually the response is, I don't want to spend my principal. You're not. What you're doing is you're actually accelerating your principal because you're allowing compound interest to work for you by reinvesting the bond interest or reinvesting the stock dividend at a much higher compound rate of return. Now here's the other factor, and this is one that a lot of people miss. If I, as an example, if I cash in a stock while I am alive to spend it, if I cash in an investment while I am alive to spend it, I am paying the income taxes on that. And we've already known that Congress penalizes people that are retired more than people that are working. So the last thing I want to do in retirement when I'm in that distribution phase, when I've converted from people money to money at work, is start cashing in taxable investments to spend. What I want to do is I want to spend down the cash. And when people say, but I still want to leave something to my kids, great. Here's what you want to leave them. Don't leave them a cash account. Why? because there's no tax efficiency in that. While you're sitting there cashing in investments to spend, and that cash account is losing against inflation, when you end up passing it on to the kids, if you have spent down your cash or your investment account and your cash account is still sitting there, the kids have no tax benefit. What do I mean? Well, let's say that what I did is, I'm going to show you an illustration. Let's say I have a cash account here, and over here I have a stock account. Now, what people are worried about when I say spend the cash account down, they're worried about seeing it go like this, because then they say, well, I don't want to lose my principal. You're not. The compound rate of return by reinvesting over here over a period of time is much greater. So if I die, I might have this much in the cash account, but I might have that much in the stock account. Now, what's the difference? Listen, if I die and I leave my children $100,000 in a cash account, they get $100,000. There's no tax to it, right? However, if I, while I'm alive, start cashing out stocks and pay tax on bond interest, I am paying the tax on that. However, if what I do is I let the stock account grow, it could be in a Roth and it could be in a stock account. When I pass away, my kids get a complete tax forgiveness on that tax. It could even be in real estate. When you die and you pass on real estate, all of the capital gains are forgiven. All of the recapture of the depreciation is forgiven. If you buy a stock at $100,000 and you pass it on to your kids at $1 million, all the taxes are forgiven. So again, in proper distribution methodology, what you're trying to do is spend down that low interest, high taxed vehicle first. While that is being spent down, bucket number 2 and bucket number 3 are growing. Now, what's going to happen is there's going to be a period of time where bucket 1 is going to empty out. Now, let me be clear about this. You're still going to set a minimum cash emergency account. So we're only talking about the amount above that cash emergency account. But while at that period of time, and it could be 4.5 years, it could even last 5.5, 6 years. When that first bucket runs out, bucket number 2 is sitting there growing. It's been reinvesting in compound interest, and bucket number 3 is growing out. So while bucket number 2 is now growing, and what you do now is at the end of that 10th year is you're going to simply take bucket number 3, that's the 10-year bucket, and you're going to start pouring it back into bucket number 1 and bucket number 2. Now, here's a question I always get. Do you wait until the 10th year? No, you don't wait until the 10th year. I believe in dollar cost averaging in and dollar cost averaging out. No matter which way you do it, it's a safer way to do it. So what you'll essentially do is in the end of the 5th year, you'll start taking an income from bucket number 2 over 5 years. However, at the end of the 5 years, you're going to start converting bucket number 3, the 10-year bucket, over a 5-year period to refill bucket 1 and to refill bucket number 2. So by the end of the 10th year, you've actually made your conversion so that you now have those buckets all filled back up again. So hopefully it makes sense. What I'm talking about is that, again, you want to spend down the least effective, lowest return, highest taxed money first, right? Like I told you about those guys putting the pool in. Get rid of lazy workers. They're no good. They're just going to cost you money, right? You want those productive workers, and the productive workers are unfortunately the volatile ones like real estate, stocks, longer term bonds, those kinds of things. And so again, the problem occurs is when people try to depend upon that for income. And it's not designed for income. It's designed for long-term growth. And hopefully in this volatile season of investments that we have, that will help align what you're trying to do with your money a lot better. Now, let's finish off here and tell you about the offer that I promised. I know that we're all sitting at home now and we're on kind of virtual lockdown. But what I want to do is right before we got online, I had chatted over to Barb in our office, and Barb had told me that we had a stockpile of books that we had gotten from the publisher a while back. And I thought, hey, you know what? Why don't we see who wants a book and we can mail it out to them? Now, I do know that a lot of you that are already working with us, you have a book because we have either given you a book or you bought a book when I released this back in 2016. And that's one of the reasons you're working with us. So what we're doing is this. We only have a certain number of these books. And for those of you that already have one, you might have a child, you might have a friend, you might have a neighbor. We'll mail it out for free. Just give Mandy a call at the office. There's the number. It's 844-702-1040, 844-702-1040. Or you can even email Emma, and that's admin@hhtba.net. It is a paperback book, which is why I asked that question at the beginning. I do have Kindle versions, and from what I understand, and we haven't researched a lot of this, Amazon for published authors. So I've got 3 books out there, and for apparently they allow us to have a certain number of Kindle author gifts. I don't know what the specifics are to that. I do know that we have a stock of books in the office, and we're going to give those away for free. We're going to mail them out. There's no cost to the recipients. You just got to let us know who they are. When they run out, they run out. And apparently Amazon is not delivering anything that's not essential, or there's like a 6-week wait, so we're not even going to reorder any more of the books. So again, if you want one of those books, call in or email in. Tell us who you'd like to get one of those books. And let me just, as I'm wrapping up here before I go to questions, for those of you that want to know what the next broadcast schedule is, one of the things that you can do is, let me jump back to that web page. I've got a multitude of web pages running here. So what you can do is, if you want to find out when the next broadcasts are, the best thing to do is go to our web page, and let me show you that real quick. It's just hhrdm.com, hhrdm.com, and just come on over here to the events tab, top right. Just click on that events tab, and you're going to see the broadcast schedule. I'm putting that together now for the next 2 weeks, what that broadcast schedule will be. And so if you come down here on the blog, we'll post it there too. And the best thing that you can do is, when you're on the blog, come down here to the right-hand bottom corner and just subscribe to RSS feed. What that will do is that as soon as we post this update to the broadcast schedule, you'll get a little email telling you, hey, there's a new blog post. You go in there and you can find that event. Lastly, if you see that I'm doing a webinar at night, we will repost that in a live stream on either Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, Daily Motion. There's a bunch of different places that our system and our team is posting those live streams to the next morning. It's generally at 9 o'clock. But again, you can always just go right here to the broadcast schedule and find that. Okay, with that in mind, we're going to switch over here to questions. Okay, it looks like we had question, no video was showing up. I hope some of that showed up and was able to reconnect later on. Let's see, any other questions that we have on distributions? Let's see, 1, 2, yeah. So let me kind of explain the questions. And, while I would love to jump on and, listen, I know that there's a lot of people that are either on the radio and they're on TV and they're taking specific questions. I even see them where somebody will say, well, do you think I should buy Amazon now? And these supposed financial gurus are giving answers to this. I'm not going to do that. I'll never do that. What I am going to tell you is, every decision that you make should be engineered. It should be calculated. Again, you have to combine architecture and engineering together. You have to have a thought, a concept of what you want. What do you want your house to look like? And then you have to have it engineered. When I say engineered, what I showed you tonight was how we mathematically connect and figure out what the right actions are. And I'm looking at these questions coming in, and I would love to answer these for you. I just can't. Should I take from my Roth first? I cannot answer that. What I can answer for you is, do the calculations. You got to do the hard work to get the right answer. Here's another one. What stock should I own in my IRA? I have no idea what your asset allocation is. I have no idea what your tax bracket is. Do you see, what I'm trying to debunk is this whole financial guru concept that somebody can give you quick and fast and easy answers. There is no easy way. The reason that we limit the number of clients that we take on is the amount of work that we have to do on one client. and all the calculations on distribution planning, on mathematical taxation, on what to hold in what account, when to take it. I mean, that's a lot of work. It's not just buying and selling investments. And so this is why I tell you, I'm not going to give you an answer off the hip. And I see the questions are still coming in, and I apologize. I can't answer these questions. Let me see if there's any question I can answer on here. Every one of them is specific. Give me a general question. All right, well, I'll give you a general answer here. And here's what I'll do. I'm going to, out of respect, I'm going to answer each one of the emails that you guys are submitting these questions to, and then I'll connect you with one of our financial planners. And they can help run you through the calculations, because that's the only way we can give you a proper answer on some of these questions. So the answer to all of your questions is do the calculations. Let's see. Oh, here's, yeah, this goes out to one of our clients. Has your publisher replaced pages 41 and 42? Here's an odd thing. You know, we had multiple editors and publishers release a book, and one of our clients found a typo on page 41, 42. We did reach out. Thank you for catching that. Hopefully there's no more typos. And as most of you know, I was in the process of actually writing the second edition to Total Retirement Freedom. And then this whole Secure Act happened in January, and then the Tax Reform Act, and now this virus crisis. And so I'm only about a third of the way through my second edition. And when I looked at that last week, I actually basically said, I got to trash the whole thing. Everything was based upon Trump tax reform. And in the new book that I'm going to release, I'm going to have to redo everything, because I do not believe that our tax landscape is going to be anywhere close to what it is today in about 10 months from now. In January, February, March of next year, I really anticipate a completely different tax environment. So I can promise you this. I am working on the second edition to update that. So if you were one of the people that get the books, or you send a book to one of somebody you love or know, let them know this was written in 2016. The only difference is there's some tax calculations in that book, and those numbers have changed. Outside that, the book will actually walk you through how to set up a tax distribution, a tax efficient distribution strategy. It gives you a bunch of references to tools and techniques. It's kind of a half do-it-yourself book, and a half I want to hire somebody, but I need to know, how do I know who to hire? How do I know how to grade them? And how do I work with that person in creating these calculations? Now, I will tell you, if you go to, half the 99% of people that are out there, and they'll go, well, I got the greatest thing for you. I'm just going to sell you a whole bunch of annuities and look at the income, or I'm going to sell you a whole bunch of mutual funds, look at the income. That is the wrong methodology. You got to calculate this stuff out. So the answer is yes, they did fix page 41 and 42 typos. So thank you again for catching that. All right, so the rest of these questions, I'm going to wrap it up because we're a few minutes over today. I want to thank everybody for joining me. And again, just call in if you want us to send that last stock of books that we have to somebody that you know or love, and we'll get them out. We might be on lockdown here for another month. Might as well get some financial education. With that, have a great night.